Chapter 1 of Out from the Heart. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Out from the Heart by James Allen. Chapter 1. The Heart and the Life. As the heart, so is the life. The within is ceaselessly becoming the without. Nothing remains unrevealed. That which is hidden is but for a time. It ripens and comes forth at last. Seed, tree, blossom, and fruit are the fourfold order of the universe. From the state of a man's heart proceed the conditions of his life. His thoughts blossom into deeds, and his deeds bear the fruitage of character and destiny. Life is ever unfolding from within and revealing itself to the light, and thoughts engendered in the heart at last reveal themselves in words, actions, and things accomplished. As the fountain from the hidden spring, so flows forth a man's life from the secret recesses of his heart. All that he is and does is generated there. All that he will be and do will take its rise from there. Sorrow and happiness, suffering and enjoyment, fear and hope, hatred and love, ignorance and enlightenment, are nowhere but in the heart. They are solely mental conditions. Man is the keeper of his heart, the watcher of his mind, the solitary guard of his citadel of life. As such, he can be diligent or negligent. He can keep his heart more and more carefully. He can strenuously watch and purify his mind, and he can guard against the thinking of unrighteous thoughts. This is the way of enlightenment and bliss. On the other hand, he can live loosely and carelessly, neglecting the supreme task of rightfully ordering his life. This is the way of self-delusion and suffering. Let a man realize that life in its totality proceeds from the mind, and lo, the way of blessedness is opened up for him, for he will then discover that he possesses the power to rule his mind and to fashion it in accordance with his ideal. So he will elect to strongly and steadfastly walk those pathways of thought and action which are altogether excellent. To him, life will become beautiful and sacred, and sooner or later he will put to flight all evil, confusion, and suffering. For it is impossible for a man to fall short of liberation, enlightenment, and peace who guards with unwearying diligence the gateway of his heart. End of Chapter 1. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 2 of Out from the Heart by James Allen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 2. The Nature and Power of Mind. Mind is the arbiter of life. It is the creator and shaper of conditions, and the recipient of its own results. It contains within itself both the power to create illusion and to perceive reality. Mind is the infallible weaver of destiny. Thought is the thread. Good and evil deeds are the warp and woof, or foundation, and the web, woven upon the loom of life, is character. Mind clothes itself in garments of its own making. Man, as a mental being, possesses all the powers of mind, and is furnished with unlimited choice. He learns by experience, and he can accelerate or retard his experience. He is not arbitrarily bound at any point, but he has bound himself at many points, and having bound himself, he can, when he chooses, liberate himself. He can become bestial or pure, ignorant or noble, foolish or wise, just as he chooses. He can, by recurring practice, form habits, and he can, by renewed effort, break them off. He can surround himself with illusions until truth is completely lost. and he can destroy each of those illusions until truth is entirely recovered. His possibilities are endless, his freedom is complete. It is the nature of the mind to create its own conditions, and it chooses the states in which it shall dwell. It also has the power to alter any condition, to abandon any state. That it is continually doing, as it gathers knowledge of state after state by repeated choice and exhaustive experience. Inward processes of thought make up the sum of character in life. Man can modify and alter these processes by bringing will and effort to bear upon them. The bonds of habit, impotence, and sin are self-made, and can only be destroyed by one's self. They exist nowhere but in one's mind, and although they are directly related to outward things, they have no real existence in those things. The outer is molded and animated by the inner, and never the inner by the outer. Temptation does not arise in the outer object, but in the lust of the mind for that object. Nor do sorrow and suffering belong by nature to the external things and happenings of life, but in an undisciplined attitude of mind toward those things and happenings. The mind that is disciplined by purity and fortified by wisdom avoids all those lusts and desires which are inseparably bound up with affliction, and so arrives at enlightenment and peace. To condemn others as evil, and to curse at outside conditions as the source of evil, increases and does not lessen the world's suffering and unrest. The outer is but the shadow and effect of the inner, and when the heart is pure, all outward things are pure. All growth in life is from within outward. All decay and death is from without inward. This is the universal law. All evolution proceeds from within. All adjustment must take place within. He who ceases to strive against others, and employs his powers in transformation, regeneration, and development of his own mind, conserves his energies and preserves himself. And as he succeeds in harmonizing his own mind, he leads others by consideration and charity into a like blessed state. The way of enlightenment and peace is not gained by assuming authority and guidance over other minds, but by exercising a lawful authority over one's own mind, and by guiding one's self in pathways of steadfast and lofty virtue. A man's life proceeds from his heart and his mind. He has compounded that mind by his own thoughts and deeds. It is within his power to refashion that mind by his choice of thought. In this manner he can transform his life. Let us see how this is to be done. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 3 of Out from the Heart by James Allen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 3. Formation of Habit. Every established mental condition is an acquired habit, and has become such by continuous repetition of thought. Despondency and cheerfulness, anger and calmness, covetousness and generosity, indeed, all states of mind, are habits built up by choice until they have become automatic. A thought constantly repeated at last becomes a fixed habit of the mind, and from such habits proceeds one's life. It is in the nature of the mind to acquire knowledge by the repetition of its experiences. A thought which is very difficult, at first, to hold and dwell upon, at last becomes, by constantly being held in the mind, a natural and habitual practice. A boy, when commencing to learn a trade, cannot even handle his tools right, much less use them correctly, but after long repetition and practice he plies them with perfect ease and consummate skill. Likewise, a state of mind, at first apparently incapable of realization, is by perseverance and practice at last acquired and built into the character as a natural and spontaneous condition. In this power of the mind to form and reform its habits, its conditions, is contained the basis of a man's salvation. It is the open door to perfect liberty by the mastery of self. For as a man has the power to form harmful habits, so he equally has the same power to create habits that are essentially good. And here we come to a point which needs some clarifying, and which calls for deep and earnest thought on the part of my reader. It is commonly said to be easier to do wrong than right, to sin than to be holy. Such a condition has come to be regarded, almost universally, as a self-evident truth. No less a teacher than the Buddha has said, "Bad deeds and deeds hurtful to ourselves are easy to do. What is beneficial and good, that is very difficult to do." And with regards to humanity generally, this is true, but it is only true as a passing experience, a fleeting factor in human evolution. It is not a fixed condition of things. It is not the nature of an eternal truth. It is easier for men to do wrong than right, because of the prevalence of ignorance, because the true nature of things and the essence and meaning of life are not understood. When a child is learning to write, it is extremely easy to hold the pen wrongly and to form his letters incorrectly, but it is painfully difficult to hold the pen and to write properly. This is because of the child's ignorance of the art of writing, which can only be dispelled by persistent effort and practice, until at last it becomes natural and easy to hold the pen correctly, and difficult, as well as altogether unnecessary, to do the wrong thing. It is the same in the vital things of mind and life. To think and do rightly requires much practice and renewed effort. But the time comes at last when it becomes habitual and easy to think and do rightly, and difficult, as it is then seen to be altogether unnecessary, to do that which is wrong. Just as an artisan becomes, by practice, accomplished in his craft, so you can become, by practice, accomplished in goodness. It is entirely a matter of forming new habits of thought. And he to whom right thoughts have become easy and natural, and wrong thoughts and acts difficult to do, has attained to the highest virtue, to pure spiritual knowledge. It is easy and natural for men to sin, because they have formed by incessant repetition harmful and unenlightened habits of thought. It is very difficult for the thief to refrain from stealing when the opportunity occurs, because he has lived so long in covetous and greedy thoughts. But such difficulty does not exist for the honest man who has lived so long with upright and honest thoughts. He has thereby become so enlightened as to the wrong, folly, and fruitlessness of theft, that even the remotest idea of stealing does not enter his mind. The sin of theft is a very extreme one, and I have introduced it in order to more clearly illustrate the force and formation of habit. But all sins and virtues are formed in the same way. Anger and impatience are natural and easy to thousands of people, because they are constantly repeating anger and impatient thoughts and acts. And with each repetition, the habit is more firmly established and more deeply rooted. Calmness and patience can become habitual in the same way, by first grasping through effort a calm and patient thought, and then continuously thinking it and living in it until use becomes second nature, and anger and impatience pass away forever. It is in this manner that every wrong thought may be expelled from the mind, that every untrue act may be destroyed, and that every sin may be overcome. End of Chapter 3. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 4 of Out from the Heart by James Allen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 4. Doing and Knowing. Let a man realize that his life, in its totality, proceeds from his mind. Let him realize that the mind is a combination of habits, which he can, by patient effort, modify to any extent, and over which he can thus gain complete ascendancy, mastery, and control. At once he will have obtained possession of the key which shall open the door to his complete emancipation. But freedom from the ills of life, which are the ills of one's mind, is a matter of steady growth from within, and not a sudden acquisition from without. Hourly and daily must the mind be trained to think stainless thoughts, and adapt right and dispassionate attitudes under those circumstances in which it is prone to fall into wrong and passion. Like the patient sculptor upon his marble, the aspirant to the right life must gradually work upon the crude material of his mind until he has wrought out of it the ideal of his holiest dreams. In working towards such supreme accomplishment, it is necessary to begin at the lowest and easiest steps, and proceed by natural, progressive stages to the higher and more difficult. The law of growth, progress, evolution, and unfoldment, by gradual and ever ascending stages, is absolute in every department of life, and in every human accomplishment. Where it is ignored, total failure will result. In acquiring education, in learning a trade, or in pursuing a business, this law is fully recognized and minutely obeyed by all. But in acquiring virtue, in learning truth, and in pursuing the right conduct and knowledge of life, it is unrecognized and disobeyed by nearly all. Hence virtue, truth, and the perfect life remain unpracticed, unacquired, and unknown. It is a common error to suppose that the higher life is a matter of reading and the adoption of theological or metaphysical hypotheses, and that the spiritual principles can be understood by this method. The higher life is higher living, in thought, word, and deed, and the knowledge of those spiritual principles, which are immanent in man and in the universe, can only be acquired after long discipline in the pursuit and practice of virtue. The lesser must be thoroughly grasped and understood before the greater can be known. Practice always precedes real knowledge. The schoolmaster never attempts to teach his pupils the abstract principles of mathematics at the start. He knows that such a method of teaching would be in vain and learning impossible. He first places before them a simple sum, and having explained it, leaves them to do it. When after repeated failures and ever renewed effort they have succeeded in doing it correctly, a more difficult task is set before them, and then another and another. It is not until the pupils have, through many years of diligent application, mastered all the lessons in arithmetic, that he attempts to unfold to them the underlying mathematical principles. In learning a trade, say that of a mechanic, a boy is not at first taught the principles of mechanics, but a simple tool is put in his hand, and he is told how to rightly use it. He is then left to do it by effort and practice. As he succeeds in plying his tools correctly, more and more difficult tasks are set before him, until after years of successful practice he is prepared to study and grasp the principles of mechanics. In a properly governed household, the child is first taught to be obedient, and to conduct himself properly under all circumstances. The child is not even told why he must do this, but is commanded to do it. Only after he has far succeeded in doing what is right and proper is he told why he should do it. No father would attempt to teach his child the principles of ethics before extracting from him the practice of family duty and social virtue. Thus practice ever precedes knowledge even in the ordinary things of the world, and in spiritual things, in the living of the higher life, this law is rigid in its demands. Virtue can only be known by doing, and the knowledge of truth can only be arrived at by perfecting oneself in the practice of virtue. To be complete in the practice and acquisition of virtue is to be complete in the knowledge of truth. Truth can only be arrived at by daily and hourly doing the lessons of virtue, beginning with the simplest and passing on to the more difficult. A child patiently and obediently learns his lessons at school by constantly practicing and ever exerting himself until all failures and difficulties are surmounted. Likewise does the child of truth, undaunted by failure and made stronger by difficulties, apply himself to right doing in thought and action. As he succeeds in acquiring virtue, his mind unfolds itself in the knowledge of truth, and it is a knowledge in which he can securely rest. End of Chapter 4. Recording by Andrea Fiore.